The night sky above New London was a tapestry of stars, each one a tiny pinprick of light in the vast, endless dark. 10-year-old Lyra Voss sat cross-legged on the rooftop of her family's home, her silver hair catching the faint glow of the city below. In her hands was a battered notebook, its pages filled with scribbled equations and sketches of machines that looked like they belonged in a science fiction movie. But to Lyra, they weren't fiction. They were blueprints for the future. "Lyra," her father's voice called from below. Dr. Ethan Voss climbed the ladder to the rooftop, his face a mix of amusement and concern. "What are you doing up here again? It's past midnight." Lyra didn't look up. Her pencil moved furiously across the page, tracing the curve of a wormhole. "I'm almost done, Dad. Just one more calculation." Ethan sighed and sat down beside her. He glanced at her notebook, his eyes widening at the complexity of her work. "Lyra, this is incredible. But you're 10. Shouldn't you be dreaming about, I don't know, flying cars or something?" Lyra finally looked up, her glowing blue eyes, a result of the neural implants she'd begged for last year, locking onto his. "Flying cars are boring, Dad. I want to go there." She pointed to the stars. "I want to make it so everyone can travel to the stars like we travel to the next city. No more waiting. No more limits." Ethan chuckled, but there was a flicker of worry in his smile. "You know, most kids your age are happy with a new holo game or a trip to the lunar park." "I'm not most kids," Lyra said matter-of-factly, turning back to her notebook. "And I'm not going to stop until I figure this out." Ethan watched her for a moment, his heart swelling with pride and fear. His daughter was a prodigy, a once-in-a-generation mind. But the world wasn't always kind to those who were different. He reached out and ruffled her hair. "Just promise me one thing, Lyra." "What?" she asked, still focused on her work. "Promise me you'll remember to sleep. Even geniuses need rest." Lyra grinned. "Fine, but only if you help me with this last equation." Ethan laughed and pulled out his own datapad. "Deal." Years later, Lyra would look back on that night as the moment everything changed. It was the night she realized her dreams weren't just dreams. They were possibilities. But it was also the night she first felt the weight of expectation, the pressure to be more than just a child. That pressure would follow her for the rest of her life, shaping her into the woman who would one day stand before the galaxy and declare, "The stars are within our reach." But for now, she was just a girl on a rooftop, her head filled with stars and her heart filled with hope. And as she and her father worked through the equations, the first seeds of her groundbreaking wormhole technology were planted, seeds that would one day change the galaxy forever. The lab was alive with the hum of machines and the soft glow of holographic displays. Lyra Voss, now 25, stood at the center of it all, her silver hair tied back in a loose ponytail, her glowing blue eyes scanning the data streaming across the screens. She was close, so close, to something no one had ever achieved before. A stable wormhole, not just a theoretical concept, but a real, functioning gateway to the stars. "Lyra, you need to see this." Marcus Lee, her assistant and closest friend, burst into the lab, his face flushed with excitement. He was holding a datapad, its screen filled with numbers and graphs that made Lyra's heart race. She snatched the datapad from his hands, her eyes darting over the data. 30 seconds, she whispered, her voice trembling. "The wormhole stabilized for 30 seconds. Marcus nodded, his grin widening. "It's real, Lyra. You did it." For a moment, Lyra just stood there, the weight of what she'd accomplished sinking in. Then, without warning, she threw her arms around Marcus, laughing. "We did it. Marcus, we just changed the galaxy." The lab erupted into cheers as the rest of the team realized what had happened. But Lyra's mind was already racing ahead. 30 seconds was just the beginning. If they could stabilize the wormhole for 30 seconds, they could do it for 30 minutes. 30 hours. Forever. As the celebrations continued, Lyra slipped away to a quiet corner of the lab. She pulled out her old notebook, the one she'd filled with equations and sketches as a child. Flipping through the pages, she found the drawing she'd made that night on the rooftop, a crude sketch of a wormhole generator. She traced the lines with her finger, a smile tugging at her lips. "I told you, Dad," she whispered. "I told you I'd do it." But her moment of triumph was short-lived. As she closed the notebook, a shadow moved in the corner of the room. Lyra froze, her instincts screaming that something was wrong. She turned slowly, her eyes scanning the dimly lit lab. "Hello," she called out, her voice steady despite the knot of fear in her stomach. There was no answer, just the faint hum of the machines and the distant sound of her team celebrating. Shaking off the unease, Lyra told herself it was nothing, just her imagination. But as she turned to leave, she caught a glimpse of something on one of the monitors, a flicker of movement, a figure in the shadows. Someone had been watching her. The next morning, the news of Lyra's breakthrough spread like wildfire. Headlines across the galaxy hailed her as a genius, a visionary, the woman who had unlocked the secrets of the stars. But Lyra couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Everywhere she went, she felt eyes on her, following her, studying her. At a press conference later that week, a reporter asked her, "Dr. Boss, what's next for you? What do you plan to do with this incredible technology?" Lyra smiled, her glowing blue eyes shining with determination. "This is just the beginning," she said. "The stars are within our reach, and I won't stop until everyone can touch them." But as she left the stage, her mind was already racing. Who had been in the lab that night? And what do they want? The answers would come sooner than she expected, and they would change everything. The lab was alive with the hum of machines and the soft glow of holographic displays. Lyra Voss, now 25, stood at the center of it all, her silver hair tied back in a loose ponytail, her glowing blue eyes scanning the data streaming across the screens. She was close, so close, to something no one had ever achieved before. A stable wormhole, not just a theoretical concept, but a real, functioning gateway to the stars. "Lyra, you need to see this." Marcus Lee, her assistant and closest friend, burst into the lab, his face flushed with excitement. He was holding a datapad, its screen filled with numbers and graphs that made Lyra's heart race. She snatched the datapad from his hands, her eyes darting over the data. 30 seconds, she whispered, her voice trembling. The wormhole stabilized for 30 seconds. Marcus nodded, his grin widening. "It's real, Lyra. You did it." For a moment, Lyra just stood there, the weight of what she'd accomplished sinking in. Then, without warning, she threw her arms around Marcus, laughing. "We did it. Marcus, we just changed the galaxy." The lab erupted into cheers as the rest of the team realized what had happened. But Lyra's mind was already racing ahead. 30 seconds was just the beginning. If they could stabilize the wormhole for 30 seconds, they could do it for 30 minutes. 30 hours. Forever. As the celebrations continued, Lyra slipped away to a quiet corner of the lab. She pulled out her old notebook, the one she'd filled with equations and sketches as a child. Flipping through the pages, she found the drawing she'd made that night on the rooftop, a crude sketch of a wormhole generator. She traced the lines with her finger, a smile tugging at her lips. "I told you, Dad," she whispered. "I told you I'd do it." But her moment of triumph was short-lived. As she closed the notebook, a shadow moved in the corner of the room. Lyra froze, her instincts screaming that something was wrong. She turned slowly, her eyes scanning the dimly lit lab. "Hello," she called out, her voice steady despite the knot of fear in her stomach. There was no answer, just the faint hum of the machines and the distant sound of her team celebrating. Shaking off the unease, Lyra told herself it was nothing, just her imagination. But as she turned to leave, she caught a glimpse of something on one of the monitors, a flicker of movement, a figure in the shadows. Someone had been watching her. The next morning, the news of Lyra's breakthrough spread like wildfire. Headlines across the galaxy hailed her as a genius, a visionary, the woman who had unlocked the secrets of the stars. But Lyra couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Everywhere she went, she felt eyes on her, following her, studying her. At a press conference later that week, a reporter asked her, "Dr. Voss, what's next for you? What do you plan to do with this incredible technology?" Lyra smiled, her glowing blue eyes shining with determination. "This is just the beginning," she said. "The stars are within our reach, and I won't stop until everyone can touch them." But as she left the stage, her mind was already racing. Who had been in the lab that night? And what did they want? The answers would come sooner than she expected, and they would change everything. The envelope sat on Lyra's desk like a ticking bomb. She stared at it, her heart pounding, the message still burning in her mind. Asterisk, "You've opened a door, Dr. Voss. But not everyone wants it open." Asterisk, the symbol beneath the words, a jagged circle with a star at its center, was unfamiliar, but it felt ominous. She turned the envelope over in her hands, searching for clues, but there was nothing. No return address, no name, no trace of who had left it. "Lyra," Marcus's voice broke the silence as he stepped into her office. "You okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." She handed him the envelope without a word. His eyes widened as he read the message. "What the hell is this? Who sent it?" "I don't know," Lyra said, her voice tight. "But whoever it is, they were in the lab the other night. I saw someone or something on the monitors. I thought it was nothing, but now." Marcus frowned, his usual easygoing demeanor replaced by concern. "This is serious, Lyra. If someone's trying to scare you, it's working. We need to report this." "And say what?" Lyra snapped, pacing the room. "That I got a creepy note? That I think someone was watching me? They'll laugh me out of the room." Marcus crossed his arms, his expression hardening. "Then we figure this out ourselves. But we're not ignoring it. Not after everything you've accomplished." Lyra stopped pacing and looked at him, her glowing blue eyes filled with determination. "You're right. Whoever this is, they're not going to stop me. If they think a stupid note is going to scare me, they don't know me at all." That evening, Lyra found herself at a rally on Mars, standing before a crowd of thousands. The air was electric with excitement, but her mind kept drifting back to the envelope, the symbol, the shadow in the lab. She pushed the thoughts aside and stepped up to the podium, her silver hair catching the light as she began to speak. "My fellow citizens," she said, her voice steady and strong. "We stand on the brink of a new era. An era where the stars are no longer out of reach, where we can travel to distant worlds, explore new frontiers, and build a future that was once only a dream." The crowd erupted in cheers, but Lyra wasn't finished. "But with this new era comes new challenges. There are those who would try to hold us back, who fear what we might become. They don't want us to reach for the stars. They want to keep us grounded, divided, afraid." She paused, her eyes scanning the crowd. "But I say this, we will not be afraid. We will not be divided. We will reach for the stars, and we will do it together." The crowd roared in approval, but as Lyra stepped off the stage, her mind was already racing. The message, the symbol, the shadow, they were all connected, and she was determined to find out how. As she left the rally, a man in a dark coat approached her. "Dr. Voss," he said, his voice low and urgent. "We need to talk." Lyra froze, her instincts screaming at her to run. But before she could react, Marcus stepped between them, his expression fierce. "Who are you and what do you want?" The man held up his hands in a gesture of peace. "My name is Agent Cole. I'm with the Federation Intelligence Bureau, and I think you're in danger." The safe house was a dimly lit room tucked away in the underbelly of Mars' capital city. Lyra sat on a worn couch, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, while Marcus paced the room like a caged animal. Agent Cole stood by the door, his sharp eyes scanning the room as if expecting an attack at any moment. "Let's start from the beginning," Cole said, his voice calm but firm. "The symbol on that envelope belongs to a group called the Starfall Syndicate. They're a shadowy organization with ties to some of the most powerful corporations in the galaxy. And they don't like what you're doing, Dr. Voss." Lyra frowned, her glowing blue eyes narrowing. "What do you mean, they don't like what I'm doing? My work is about opening the galaxy to everyone. How can anyone be against that?" Cole leaned against the wall, crossing his arms. "Not everyone wants the galaxy open, Dr. Voss. Some people benefit from keeping it closed. The Starfall Syndicate profits from controlling access to resources, technology, and travel. Your wormhole technology threatens their entire operation." Marcus stopped pacing and turned to Cole, his expression incredulous. So, what? They're just going to shut her down? Because she's making the galaxy a better place? Cole's gaze hardened. They're not just going to shut her down. They're going to destroy her, and anyone who gets in their way. The room fell silent, the weight of Cole's words hanging in the air. Lyra felt a chill run down her spine, but she refused to let fear take hold. What do they want from me? She asked, her voice steady. They want you to stop, Cole said simply. But since that's not going to happen, they'll try to discredit you, sabotage your work, or worse. That's why I'm here, to make sure that doesn't happen. Marcus snorted. And why should we trust you? For all we know, you're working for them. Cole didn't flinch. You don't have to trust me, but you don't have a choice. If you want to survive this, you're going to need my help. Lyra studied him for a moment, her mind racing. She didn't like the idea of relying on someone she barely knew, but Cole was right. She didn't have a choice. What do we do? She asked finally. Cole straightened, a flicker of relief crossing his face. First, we keep you safe. Second, we find out everything we can about the Starfall Syndicate. And third, we make sure your work continues. No matter what. The next few days were a blur of security briefings, encrypted messages, and sleepless nights. Lyra's lab was placed under heavy guard, and her every move was monitored. But despite the precautions, she couldn't shake the feeling that danger was closing in. One evening, as she worked late in the lab, Marcus burst in, his face pale. Lyra, you need to see this. He handed her a datapad, its screen displaying a news article. The headline read, Dr. Lyra Voss under investigation for corporate espionage. Below it was a grainy photo of Lyra meeting with a man she didn't recognize, a man the article claimed was a known corporate spy. Lyra's heart sank. This is a setup, she said, her voice trembling with anger. They're trying to ruin me. Marcus nodded grimly. And it's working. The media's already running with it. If we don't do something fast, your reputation and your work will be destroyed. The lab was eerily quiet, the usual hum of machines replaced by an oppressive silence. Lyra sat at her desk, staring at the datapad in her hands. The grainy photo of her with the alleged corporate spy burned into her mind. She didn't recognize the man, but the Starfall Syndicate had made sure the world believed she did. The media frenzy was already out of control, and her reputation was crumbling faster than she could rebuild it. Marcus leaned against the wall, his arms crossed, his face a mask of frustration. This is insane, Lyra. How'd they even get that photo? And who's the guy? It looks like he walked out of a bad spy holodrama. Lyra shook her head, her silver hair catching the dim light. I don't know, Marcus, but if we don't figure this out soon, everything we've worked for will be gone. Just then, the door slid open, and Agent Cole stepped inside, his expression grim. We've got a problem, he said without preamble. The man in the photo, his name is Victor Kane. He's a high-ranking member of the Starfall Syndicate, and he's been missing for 3 days. Lyra's stomach dropped. Missing? What do you mean, missing? Cole crossed the room and handed her another datapad. He was last seen leaving a Syndicate safe house on Europa. No one's heard from him since. And now, conveniently, he shows up in a photo with you, accusing you of corporate espionage. This isn't a coincidence. Marcus slammed his fist against the wall. So what? They're framing her with a guy who's probably dead? That's low, even for them. Cole nodded. It's worse than that. If Kane is dead, they'll pin it on you too. They're not just trying to ruin your career, Dr. Voss. They're trying to destroy you. Lyra stood, her glowing blue eyes blazing with determination. Then we find him. If Kane's alive, he's the only one who can clear my name. If he's dead, well, we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. Cole hesitated, his jaw tightening. It's not that simple. The Syndicate's got eyes everywhere. If we go after Kane, they'll know, and they won't hesitate to take us out. Marcus stepped forward, his voice steady. We don't have a choice. If we don't do something, Lyra's finished. And so is her work. Lyra placed a hand on Marcus's arm, her expression softening. Thank you, but this isn't just about me. If the Syndicate's willing to go this far to stop me, it's because they're scared. Scared of what we can do. Scared of what we can achieve. And that means we're on the right track. Cole studied her for a moment, then nodded. All right, but we do this my way. No risks, no mistakes. Understood. Lyra and Marcus exchanged a glance, then nodded. Understood. The next few hours were a whirlwind of planning and preparation. Cole secured a small, unmarked shuttle, while Lyra and Marcus gathered what little evidence they had on Kane. As they boarded the shuttle, Lyra couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into a trap, but she also knew they had no other choice. As the shuttle lifted off, Marcus turned to her, his voice low. You sure about this, Lyra? Once we're in Syndicate territory, there's no turning back. Lyra met his gaze, her eyes filled with resolve. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. We're not just fighting for me, Marcus. We're fighting for the future. The shuttle descended through Europa's icy atmosphere, its engines humming softly as it navigated the treacherous terrain below. Lyra stared out the window, her glowing blue eyes reflecting the pale, frozen landscape. The message Cole had received. Asterisk, Kane's alive. But he's not alone. Asterisk played on a loop in her mind. Who else was out there? And what were they walking into? We're approaching the coordinates, Cole said, his voice tense as he piloted the shuttle. Stay sharp. If the Syndicate's here, they'll be watching. Marcus checked his weapon, his usual easygoing demeanor replaced by a steely focus. Let's hope Kane's still in one piece. If he's not, this whole trip is a waste. Lyra tightened her grip on the edge of her seat. He's alive. He has to be. Otherwise, this is all for nothing. The shuttle touched down in a secluded area, its landing lights casting long shadows across the icy ground. Cole led the way, his weapon drawn, as they approached a derelict outpost half buried in the snow. The place looked abandoned, but Lyra's instincts screamed otherwise. As they entered the outpost, the air grew colder, the silence oppressive. Broken equipment and shattered glass littered the floor, and the walls were scorched as if from a firefight. Lyra's breath fogged in the air as she whispered, "This place is a graveyard. What happened here?" Before anyone could answer, a faint sound echoed through the corridor, a low groan, followed by the shuffle of footsteps. Cole raised his weapon, his eyes scanning the shadows. "Stay behind me." They moved cautiously, following the sound until they reached a sealed door. Cole gestured for silence, then keyed in a code to override the lock. The door slid open with a hiss, revealing a dimly lit room. And there, slumped in the corner, was Victor Kane. He was alive, but barely. His face was bruised, his clothes torn, and his hands bound with heavy restraints. When he saw them, his eyes widened in fear. You shouldn't have come," he croaked, his voice barely audible. Lyra rushed to his side, her medical training kicking in as she checked his injuries. "What happened? Who did this to you?" Kane coughed, his breath ragged. "The Syndicate. They found out I was talking to the FIB. They left me here as bait. You need to go. Now." Before Lyra could respond, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed through the outpost. Cole spun around, his weapon raised. "We got company." Marcus grabbed Kane's arm, hauling him to his feet. "Can you walk?" Kane nodded weakly. "Yeah, but it won't matter. They're already here." The door to the room slammed shut, and the lights flickered ominously. A voice crackled over the outpost's intercom, cold and mocking. "Welcome, Dr. Voss. We've been expecting you." Lyra's heart raced as she turned to Cole. "What do we do?" Cole's jaw tightened. "We fight our way out. But whatever happens, don't let them take Kane. He's the only one who can clear your name." The shuttle shuddered as the Syndicate warship's tractor beam locked onto them, pulling them inexorably toward its gaping hangar bay. Lyra gripped the edge of her seat, her mind racing. They were out of options, out of time, but she refused to give up. Not now, not after everything they'd been through. "We're not going down without a fight," Marcus growled, his hands tightening on the controls as he tried to break free of the beam. But it was no use. The warship was too powerful. Kane, still weak but alert, leaned forward, his eyes locked on the glowing device embedded in his wrist. "There's one way out of this," he said, his voice steady despite the chaos. "But it's risky." Lyra turned to him, her glowing blue eyes filled with determination. "What is it?" Kane hesitated, then held up his wrist. "This tracker, it's not just for them to follow us. It's also a failsafe. If I activate it, it'll send a signal to the FIB. They'll know exactly where we are, but it'll also alert the Syndicate. They'll come after us with everything they've got." Cole's eyes narrowed. "Do it. We don't have a choice." Kane nodded and pressed a hidden button on the device. A faint beep echoed through the shuttle, and the tracker's glow intensified. "It's done," he said. "Now we wait." The shuttle was pulled into the warship's hangar bay, its engines powering down as armed Syndicate operatives surrounded them. The door hissed open, and Alara stepped inside, her expression cold and unreadable. "It's over, Lyra," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. "You've lost." Lyra stood, her silver hair catching the harsh light of the hangar. "You betrayed us, Alara. You betrayed me. But this isn't over. Not yet." Alara's lips curled into a faint smile. "You always were too stubborn for your own good. But this time you're out of moves." Before Lyra could respond, the sound of blaster fire echoed through the hangar. The Syndicate operatives turned, their weapons raised, as a squad of FIB agents stormed in, led by none other than Agent Cole's superior, Director Mara Kane, Victor's sister. "Stand down," Mara barked, her voice carrying the weight of authority. "This ends now." Alara's smile faltered as she realized the tide had turned. "You think this changes anything?" she spat. "The Syndicate is everywhere. You can't stop us." Mara stepped forward, her eyes blazing. "Maybe not, but we can stop you." The hangar erupted into chaos as the FIB agents clashed with the Syndicate operatives. Lyra and Marcus grabbed Kane, pulling him to safety as Cole joined the fight. In the confusion, Alara tried to escape, but Lyra blocked her path. "It didn't have to be this way," Lyra said, her voice filled with sorrow. "We could have changed the galaxy together." Alara's eyes softened for a moment, but then she shook her head. "You still don't understand, do you? Some doors are better left closed." Before Lyra could respond, Alara pulled a small device from her pocket and activated it. A blinding flash of light filled the hangar, and when it faded, she was gone. Weeks later, Lyra stood on the steps of the Galactic Senate, her glowing blue eyes scanning the crowd of supporters gathered below. The Syndicate had been dealt a crippling blow, but they were far from defeated. Alara was still out there, and the fight for the galaxy's future was far from over. But for now, Lyra allowed herself a moment of triumph. Her name had been cleared, her work had been vindicated, and a wormhole technology was closer than ever to becoming a reality. As she stepped up to the podium, the crowd erupted in cheers. "My fellow citizens," she began, her voice steady and strong. "The stars are within our reach, but they will not come to us. We must reach for them, together." The crowd roared in approval, their voices echoing across the galaxy. Lyra smiled, her heart filled with hope. The road ahead would be long and difficult, but she knew they could overcome anything as long as they stood together. As Lyra left the stage, a message flashed on her datapad. It was from an unknown sender, just 2 words, *, watch your back. *, the Syndicate wasn't done with her, and neither was Alara. The fight for the galaxy's future was just beginning.